The topic today is on making a career transition later in life. We wanted to be able to speak to people who resonate with being in the later in life stage, who are thinking of changing careers, whether or not that is freelance medical writing, may or may not be true for you. It's not going to be industry specific. We really want to kind of get into the nuances of what it's like to make a career change later in life. And so I'm going to kind of ask questions and prompts for the other panelists here, and I'm going to chime in with my own thoughts and my own experiences from all the people that I've supported with this. So Bernard, I'm curious to know, because you've worked with a lot of people and couples as well who have been navigating career changes later in life. I imagine that some of the things that Liz shared in terms of like, it feels like a landslide, or I'm beginning again, or I have a lot to process, or there's a lot of other considerations that are going on at the same time as the career change. What things are common to the people that you've worked with? And are there any other sort of nuances or kind of, I don't know, not avenues, but like ways that people approach their career change that is different from what Liz has shared?
Yeah, I think a big theme is that people who are facing these transitions coming up actually have a lot of tools and resources and abilities, and you're basically learning how to use them in a different way. You've spent, many, many years in a certain situation, building and growing, learning, and you've probably built up a lot of experiences and that kind of make you who you are. And one of the biggest questions in terms of starting over is like it's a part of asking who am I, but it's also like what do I know, what am I good at, and we go through a process of questioning that as well. And so there can be a feeling of like we feel kind of like clueless or powerless, even though what we're used to is to be very capable, to feel certain about our situation, to feel certain about our ability to solve problems. And this also does include our finances as well. We've spent years building up a certain financial situation, and that is part of the resources that you can use to go through a transition well. But sometimes people are not very sure how to do that. How do I use my financial resources, whether that's to afford myself, I don't know, time off from my regular job, my past job? Is it to move to a different place, a different city or a country? Um, so people sometimes have to go through that period of figuring that out first before they can take any action with actually transitioning. So when you're starting over and beginning again, you're not beginning with nothing. It can feel that way. It can feel like we're beginning with nothing, uh, but you actually have a lot of access to resources and what you know.
Yeah, that makes sense. I actually have a follow-up question for you, Bernard, around the tools or the strategies that could help somebody make a career transition. With the people that you've helped, are there any specific frameworks or tools that you use to kind of help them reframe something or look at it a bit differently? Or is there something that we can bring to the people who are listening?
Yeah, definitely. This is the first thing that comes up for me is a framework called the transition cycle, and this was developed by a guy. His name is David Pollock, and he researched children who grow up internationally, which is basically my background, expats. This is also called TCKs, third culture kids. This idea has gained more prominence now because of globalization since the 90s, basically. And he studied these different groups of people, these families who are very mobile, and the way that people deal with transition. And he came up with these different stages. It's very similar to you can kind of map it onto the stages of grief as well, where you start off established in your situation, everything is certain, and then you go through a period of like uncertainty and instability and chaos, And then once you get to the new place, traditionally this was a new location, you would gradually settle in and relearn a lot of these things. And then they would become integrated into your identity of who you are culturally, also your toolbox of what you know and your ability to solve problems. I'm wondering if I can share my screen really quickly to show you all what that looks like. This came from his book, so I made it myself to make it more organized. So basically, you start with being involved, everything is certain and secure, and the leading stage is preparing for the change. Like you've heard the news or you've made the decision. The transition stage and the entering stage are when you go through the most, I think, instability and chaos. Lots of new situations that you're in. You're completely out of your comfort zone, and then you gradually learn through trial and error like what works for you. And then the end of the cycle is re-involvement, and all of the bullet points are the same as the first column. So he tries to show that this is a cycle that you go through where you can arrive at stability and certainty again after you've gone through this change and you've kind of had your takeaways and lessons, and it becomes kind of integrated into your life. Yeah,
Oh,
actually,
this is
I can share file attachments actually in the chat box, so I will do that.
Yes. Well, can you leave this open just for now as well?
Yeah.
Because what's interesting is that we've got 3 different phases of the cycle from 3 different attendees. So we have Jen, who's in the transition phase. She's already left her previous career and she's in the process of starting up her new thing. So she's in the middle here. And then we have Cameron, who's in the leaving, or she's still in the involvement, but she's kind of moving into the leaving. She's kind of thinking ahead about retirement. That would be around 5 years from now. So she's thinking, can I transition to something that's part-time? And if I do that, what would it even be? So she's kind of in between the involvement and the leaving. And then we have Maxine, who's kind of in the entering phase, because she's already changed careers, but it seems like it's been quite a slow transition, and she's still kind of adapting to everything. So I think be interesting to kind of try to cover the full spectrum in the rest of our conversation. Liz, what phase would you say that you are in right now, and how do you relate to this framework?
This particular framework, I have a couple of other frameworks that I relate to. I haven't had time to really look this over necessarily. For me, it's not so much about returning to what was or finding the same comfort again. For me, it's really more about evolving into something that may feel unknown to me. So the work of Robert Keegan jumps to mind for me, because he talks about how we reach this stage, and not everybody reaches this stage. Maybe a third of the population reaches a stage where they are questioning what it was they've been involved in and deciding that they are going to create that next step for themselves. So that stage of self-transforming, self-authoring, and then self-transforming mind really resonated with me. So I would say that I'm definitely in the self-transforming mind phase. In terms of this one, leaving, transition, entering, I feel like I'm definitely in re-involvement, but it's re-involvement in a new way. It's evolving. It's still evolving.
Right. Yeah. It sounds like these are kind of more like the feelings surrounding what it's like at the different phases, because initially there's like a loss and there's a change, and then you can't necessarily see, like Cameron was saying, I don't really know what next is for me. I don't really know what the future holds. And so it can, I imagine it feels quite overwhelming and kind of like, well, there's so many things I could do. How do I even start narrowing that down? And then in this sort of, middle stage, you kind of have a mix of like leaving things behind and then moving towards something new, but still feeling like a beginner and like you're still adapting and you're still learning and out of your comfort zone a lot. And then in the entering and re-involvement, yeah, it's sort of like it's still a new field, it's still a new career, it's still a new role and a new identity that you're adapting to. And so, you know, I think it really helps to know that you will get there in the end, to kind of to know what we're aiming for really in terms of like what is the end of the change.
Yeah, and I think you make a good point about that in terms of getting there. I think the thing that makes it difficult and challenging, but also exciting and imaginative, is we don't know where there is. And then
Yeah.
that's a new experience. And it also echoes the feeling of, you said, losing or loss. So there is a sort of death or a letting go of what was. And that's very frightening as well, because we feel if we let go of that, we don't know that we will find what is there. And that it's really an all-encompassing experience of transformation.
Yeah, yeah. And that leads me to my next question. And so for somebody like Cameron, who really doesn't know what is next for her, but she knows that some things are going to have to change, or even for somebody who's trying to make sure that the change feels good or as good as possible, because like we said, there are going to be sort of negative aspects of it or challenging aspects of it, but I'm sure there's a way to do it that feels more aligned or feels more like exciting, or like that you're heading in the right direction. So how I'll go to Liz first. How can people try to align with their values or the things that are important to them in making a career change?
I love that question, because we all do want to feel good, and we do want to feel confident, and we don't want to feel anxious. But I've found, not only in my own work, but work with others, that it's really important to create some space where you can actually feel some of the loss, just like you would if you actually lost somebody. There's a grieving period. So there's a way in which we have to kind of grieve what it is that we've known, so that we can move into what the unknown is. And I practice that in a number of different ways. But it's recognizing when it's coming up for you, and recognizing when you're feeling the feeling of, I wish things would be different, or I wish things would stay the same. I think that's a very interesting relationship, that when we're in that anxiety mode, in that unknown space, which is the predominant experience really in our lives, but when we're able to stay in the top 5% of our experience mentally, cognitively, we feel like we understand who we are, and we've developed this persona that we have. But there's 95% of the thoughts that are coming from our subconscious and from the unknown are very powerful, and they're actually drawing us to something different and something new and another way of understanding ourselves. So we don't really lose ourselves, but we have to start grappling with this idea of, I wish things would stay the same, and I wish things would change at the same time. And it's a real feeling of being almost split apart. So we have to have some compassion for ourselves. We have to have some empathy. We have to find ways to support ourselves, tapping into your intuition, getting a good therapist, doing movement therapies, working, et cetera, et cetera. There's a lot of things that can facilitate it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that I have a question about some of this later on, actually. But Bernard, I wonder if you have anything to add in terms of, what does it look like to be in alignment with something that you're moving towards? Like, how can we find that connection, or know if we even have that connection?
Yeah, it definitely it has to start with your values, because those are things that hopefully don't change based on your situation or your circumstances. That's one of the things that you can take with you through different stages of life. And of course, your values can evolve and change. But what we mean by that is that what happens with your values should not be reactive to your circumstances. With your career, it might be, with all the changes that have happened in the world and in the economy, maybe you have just gone through a period of being reactive with your job position, or how much you are paid, or suddenly not getting paid anymore. but your values are things that you can come back to as the foundation. So when you're moving towards the next thing, whatever it is, it's okay to think about it partly in terms of the circumstances, like where do I want to live next? How much money would I like to make, or do I need to make to support myself? It's still important to think about those things, but that shouldn't be the foundation. It's not just about building the circumstances that you want to get to or arrive at. It's also like, how do I want to feel in this next stage of life? And we hear about this a lot in healthcare with like before and after you've gotten licensed, or in your education and those early years of working and getting trained, people will talk a lot about how they lost a lot of things about themselves through their training and learning years, loss of relationships, losing contact with people, losing your self-care, or losing things about your health, physical burnout. And so people will talk about the transition to the next thing if they want to become more independent in their career, in freelance writing or any other kind of thing. It's about kind of getting those things back, or rebuilding those things that in some ways are not actually that related to your career. But the career change is an opportunity for you to kind of afford yourself those things.
And to reprioritize yourself. We do go through a period where we're prioritizing the job, the boss, the clients, the children, the parents. And so I think that's a very natural thing that happens, is that we have all this outgoing energy. And that's what really became clear for me, is like, oh my God, I just spent 30 years like giving, stepping up for everybody. And I thought I was fine, but really what was operating there was, if everybody else is fine, I'm okay. And it can be kind of shocking to realize that you haven't really prioritized. I didn't even want to admit it to myself, that I really hadn't prioritized myself in ways that were really important to me, even though I was high functioning. So, yeah.